All right, so last section for central nervous system, we're looking at the spinal cord. So there's two main functions for the spinal cord. So first is going to be the link between the brain and the peripheral nervous system, and also integration center for spinal reflexes. So the spinal cord is composed of white matter, so what we see here, and it's going to surround then the gray matter, which is going to be more medial. The gray matter is arranged with a left and right dorsal horn and a left and right ventral horn. So here we have our dorsal side on the back side and then ventral side, which is on the front. Okay, so the white matter is composed of the ascending and descending fiber tracts, so going up and down. So with the ascending tracts, this takes sensory information from receptors in the skin, muscles, joints, and organs, such as touch, temperature, or pain. And it has those fibers, that information is going to cross over. So this will either happen within the spinal cord or within the medulla oblongata. All right, so this is just showing here in this figure that within the medulla we have that information crossing over onto the opposite side. Versus in this image here at the level of the spinal cord, we're having that information travel onto the opposite side. So all in all, what this means is that the origin of the input and the brain area are going to be opposite to one another. So if something happens in your left hand, say like hot temperature, you touch a hot stove, that information will be processed on the right side of the brain. The descending tracts have two different pathways, so going from the brain down back to the spinal cord and then out to the periphery. And so with the corticospinal or pyramidal pathway, what we have are the cell bodies, and these neurons are found in the precentral gyrus, okay, so primary motor area. And so 80 to 90% of these are going to cross over at the level of the medulla oblongata. So if we're looking at this, we're going to follow then that blue descending path, okay? And then descend then in a lateral corticospinal tract. Those that do not cross over in the medulla, so here in the purple what we have, these are going to descend and cross at the level of the spinal cord where the nerves are going to leave that spinal cord. The second type of tract, the extrapyramidal tract, this is where these axons are originating in the brainstem and are controlled by motor circuits of the basal nuclei. And so these are important for initiating body movements, maintaining posture, and then also controlling facial expression. So our cranial nerves, these are also actually part of the peripheral nervous system, and they have nerves that arise from nuclei within the brain. And there's 12 different pairs that are mixed with both sensory and motor neurons for most of them. However, some function as either one or the other. And so these tend to be associated with vision, olfaction, and hearing, and are sensory only, and have their cell bodies and ganglia that are found in the sensory organs. So if we look here at the different cranial nerves, so here we have cranial nerve number 1. So this has to do with olfaction and stems off of the olfactory bulb. Then we have the optic nerve, so cranial nerve number 2, and so this is important for visual information, and so we'll have lateral movement of the eyes. Then cranial nerve number 3, ocular motor, so this is important for only motor fibers, and so we have the extrinsic eye movement, also within the iris and the ciliary muscles of the eye. Then we have cranial nerve number 4, the trochlear nerve, also just a motor nerve that is important for oblique muscle movement of the eye. Cranial nerve number 5, the trigeminal nerve. This is going to be important for sensory information for the head and face, and then also for motor muscles for chewing or mastication. Then we have cranial nerve number 6, the abducens nerve, important for extrinsic eye muscles, so mostly just a motor fiber. Then cranial nerve number 7, facial nerve. This is important for motor movement of the muscles in face and scalp, and also for salivary and tear glands. Then we have cranial nerve number 8, vestibular cochlear nerve, where this is sensory information for the cochlea of the inner ear, vestibule, and then semicircular canals, where they'll converge to make that nerve. Cranial nerve number 9, glossopharyngeal. This is going to be both motor and sensory, motor movement of the pharynx or throat muscles, and then the parotid gland for saliva. And then also with sensory information for our taste buds and receptors that are found in the pharynx and carotid sinus as well. Then we have cranial nerve number 10, the vagus nerve. So this is important for both motor and sensory information, where the muscles of the throat and larynx and then thoracic and abdominal organs will be innervated here, and then sensory information of the taste buds on the tongue and the pharynx. Then cranial nerve number 11, this is muscles or motor movement for muscles of the larynx, pharynx, soft palate, the shoulder, and the neck. And then lastly, the hypoglossal nerve. This is important for motor movement of tongue. So spinal cord is going to extend from the brainstem or medulla oblongata through the vertebral canal, and so there's 31 pairs of spinal nerves through different spaces. And so we have 8 pairs of cervical neck nerves, 12 pairs of thoracic, 5 pairs of the lumbar, which they innervate the abdominal region, 5 pairs of sacral, which innervate the pelvic region, and then 1 pair of coccygeal nerves, the tailbone. All right, and so what we have here is their locations, and so these nerves of the cervical are going to be function to innervate the cervical region. The thoracic nerves, these are going to innervate that of the rib cage, lumbar, that abdominal, and then we'll start to branch down into the lower appendages, and then sacral nerves a lot have to do with the reproductive and urinary organs as well. So a big thing about spinal cord is that these are going to be mixed nerves that separate near the spinal cord into dorsal, which carries sensory fibers, and then a ventral root, which carries those motor fibers. So that's where we have the information that's going to tell us from our external environment with the dorsal root ganglion, and then motor neurons are going to be in the ventral horns of the spinal cord. So the reflex arc is responsible for unconscious motor responses to a sensory stimulus where information does not have to be integrated within the brain, and so it can be localized within the level of the spinal cord. So there's different regions that are responsible for the arc. So the first one is the sensory receptor. So this is what's going to respond to our external environment. So this could be something like thermoreceptors for heat and pain receptors, nociceptors. They're responsible for detecting different painful stimuli. And then what we'll have then are, if those sensory receptors are activated, then that will have that sensory neuron then take that information to the level of the central nervous system. Can be within the spinal cord itself, or can be transferred further into the brain. Then we'll have some type of interneurons that are going to take that information and then transpose that onto motor neurons, where motor neurons then are going to elicit an effector, which is typically a muscle or a gland that will respond to that initial sensory stimulus. All right, so then here in this example, what we have is, here we have the sensory receptor, say within the skin, and say you touch something painful, okay? So what happens is that these receptors send that impulse into that sensory neuron where it's going to enter into the dorsal side and it's going to project onto these different association or interneurons within the spinal cord. Then that's going to activate then these motor neurons, and so these are going to travel out via the ventral root of the spinal cord and the spinal nerve, and then it will activate the somatic motor neuron, where the effector then will be the skeletal muscle, so your response will be, say, to remove your hand. Okay, and so this is an example of a somatic reflex where the effectors are skeletal muscle. However, we also have autonomic reflexes that the effectors then are smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands.